Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of Friday Morning at the Funhouse with Martin Popoff. Good morning, my friend, on this gloomy, earlier than normal Friday morning.
Yeah, we are doing this a little early today, but it's already sunny out here in Toronto. The heat wave is broken. It was very, very hot yesterday. I think we were around 90-ish up here, but it's definitely cooled down a little today. So just good all around nice day here.
Yeah, we had that little bit of coolness yesterday. I don't know what we're supposed to get today. I haven't looked at the forecast, but I think we've been in this weird kind of like hot, cold thing. Like every other day, it changes drastically. So I don't know what's going on. It's been a weird early parts of the summer. But you know what? That's living in the Northeast of the US of A these days, it seems. So we've got an interesting show for you here today, folks. So we've had a lot of people on the channel ask us for, years and years to do shows about lyrics. And as most people know, I'm not a huge lyric guy. So Martin and I were talking the other day, and he's like, well, what about a show with bands that we just, at some point in time, whether we still do it now or we did back in the day, where we would just sit and read those lyrics alongside the music. And at first I was kind of like, oh man, this is going to be tough for me. But, the more I started thinking about it, and the more I started just kind of looking over the collection, I was able to find 10, because that's what we're doing, 10 each, 10 bands where at some point in time, I really kind of enjoyed reading along to the lyrics because I think Martin pointed it out, almost like reading a book, right? You're just sitting down and you're like, it's playing and you're like, all right, this is pretty cool. And even to the point where some of these bands, you could literally not even listen to the music and just pull out a lyric book and just kind of read along because maybe the way they write matches up with stuff that you like to read, like as far as books go, like, sci-fi, horror, fantasy, crime thrillers, whatever, that sort of thing. So I don't know, Martin, if you want to add a little bit to that, but.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, this is how this sort of evolved, this idea of bands that are good reads in a way, right? But it's almost like some of mine might not be the best reads per se, but it's the whole world that they create. But the best reads thing is a good litmus test. Yeah. Bands that are definitely good reads deserve to be on this list. But not for sure vice versa. You could have bands that it just does it is just sort of song lyrics and it's maybe not a great read, but you love the lyrics as well. So this is just generally, bands that we love the lyrics and definitely on the read end, whether they read like books and there are proper sentences and you can get the gist of it, these are bands that definitely send you back to the lyric sleeves, whether they're weird little handwritten things or whatever, or too small to see in the CDs or whatever. You're just dying to know what they say. In the modern day, you just Google it and look it up, right? It's like, what the heck were they talking about there? So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we got 10 each. So I'll have Martin kick us off with his number 10.
All right, so my number 10, I'm going with Voivod. I love the whole presentation of this band. This is one of the bands that feels like they create a worldview. Definitely, this is a band that has this whole, Michelle is into this, scared of nuclear war thing, and maybe Earthlings have to fly off and populate other planets. The whole Elon Musk thing, right? Are we gonna move to Mars and whatnot? And then there's monsters, so it's very sci-fi and horror and environmental and a little political at the same time. There's just a few more Voivods here, and the neat thing is it all goes together with Michelle's artwork. And then the music is very sort of thorny and Vandergraaf, progressive thrashy. So it's got that dark feel as well. And it goes into a whole package. And yeah, the neat thing is this sort of Voivodian view goes through quite a few of the albums. And even when he's not directly talking about that, it's neat to see a band. Saga has done this, Blue Öyster Cult has done this, where you get a little bit of a throughput, not just to make one concept album, but the concept kind of roils throughout the catalog, which is all very kind of cool. There's another cool one there. And then later on, of course, and then all along, I suppose, you also get Snake in there doing lyrics. And these guys are French Canadians, so there's a little bit of English as a second language thing that goes on to it as well. So it's kind of very fragmented and dense. and they say things like God phones, right? It's, Snake especially comes up with more pedestrian, understandable, less sci-fi lyrics, but they just crack you up, sort of thing, because there's a little bit of that English as a second language thing, but he's also right in line with Michelle. So the two of them together are just this power packed, they're writers of these action events and just interesting turns of phrase to go along with the band's interesting music. So there you go. Number one, Voivod.
Well, that's a good choice. Yeah, very intelligent lyrics and kind of fun. And I think at the time they were one of the few bands of that sort that were coming out with lyrics that actually made you care to read along, right? Among all the other heavy bands that were coming out at that time. Good choice. All right, my first choice. I originally was drawn to the lyrics of this band back originally because they're all horror film fans in the band, especially their bass player, and a lot of their lyrical content on the first 3 albums or so were very horror oriented, which appealed to me because I've been a horror fan since I was a kid. And then as they started to go on in their career, they started to take on themes of, mythology and ancient Egypt and sci-fi and whatever. They've run the gamut as far as different types of themes that they've kind of tackled along the way. And, originally Steve Harris, their bass player, was the guy with all the ideas, but then all of a sudden Bruce Dickinson, Adrian Smith, the whole band's writing, talking about Iron Maiden. For me, I remember those first 2 albums, again, musically loved it because right in my wheelhouse, but man, Wrathchild, Murders in the Rue Morgue, Killers, Twilight Zone. I mean, all these songs in the first album. You have Phantom of the Opera. Number of the Beast has all sorts of really cool, ghoulish, kind of lurid horror themes and whatnot. And that drew me right in. And before you know it, they start to build on all these big epic themes, like all of a sudden on Peace of Mind and Power Slave and Somewhere in Time, Seventh Son, basically paving a way for a lot of the power metal bands that kind of came in their wake, who have taken that mantle and done all these really grandiose ideas where you could literally, it's like reading a fantasy book or reading some kind of historical type of a book. So, and I've always liked that about Maiden. And, you could say what you want about the quality of their more recent albums. I know it's like a love-hate thing with a lot of people, but I still really appreciate the thought that they put behind their lyrics, even though sometimes you're kind of reading along, you're kind of like, what? What is this supposed to be about? But it's still, I like the fact that they actually give it some thought, and there is obviously a lot of time spent on their end putting this stuff together. So whether you think the music meanders a little bit is another thing, but I think lyrically they still seem to really give a shit about putting lots of creativity behind their lyrics. So yeah, Iron Maiden for me is my first choice.
Yeah, just like Rush, they're a band that gets you going back and reading either again or for the first time certain poetry and books and horror movies. And Steve Harris has always been very good about reminding us about the horrors of war. And, we learn a lot about all these different battles and things with the band. So very, very dense lyrics, very colorful lyrics. And again, it reminds me a little bit of a Rush in that respect. All right. My number 9 choice, The Doors. Jim Morrison is, we see him almost as a poet. I mean, he made poetry books. He made that American Prayer album. He's essentially a poet, duct taped onto this kind of weird, almost horrible music that definitely, I don't know, almost wouldn't have stood on its own, and maybe they wouldn't have been a famous band. I mean, to have this sort of, as I call it, demented carnival music, right? Where, I keep remembering and forgetting every 5 years whether they had a bass player or a bass guitar, or how they managed to do bass, because they really don't have a dedicated bass guitarist, right? So we've got Ray Manzarek in there, and Robbie Krieger and John Densmore, but basically I think 68% of this band is Jim Morrison. His voice, his persona, his lyrics, and people over the years, when they get snobby about it and say, oh, it's not real literature or whatever. I mean, I really feel that stuff that he did was real literature. And when there was that big Doors revival in '81, I bought all in. I drank the Kool-Aid. I was in. I had I had his books and I loved reading all those Doors lyrics and
Oh,
thought
yeah.
they were great. And they're beautiful lyrics for sure. So this is a case where the lyrics, this almost feels like the most outsized case where the lyrics are really, really important to this band. And they're almost like the most important thing, which I guess reminds me a little bit of someone like a Leonard Cohen, right? Where the guy's a poet and a writer and the music is almost incidental in a way.
Right. You just
And,
want to hear him, yeah.
yeah, you can kind of put down the Doors music, I think, and you know, and have that be a sensible view, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I mean, you look at those couple of albums that they did after he died. Does anybody know or really care about those?
Yeah.
I mean, fine musicians, great musicians, those three guys. And, you know, you have to have the whole package when it comes to the Doors. But you know what? You take Jim Morrison out of the equation. Are they ever a big band?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And not only was he an interesting songwriter, I mean, the guy was just a total character and just so, you know, off the hinge half the time. So that was the kind of appeal to it. I mean, there will never be another Jim Morrison.
Yeah.
I mean, just such a iconic rock star.
Yeah.
That's what he was. He was a rock star, a weird one for sure, but he was a rock star. All right, my next band might not be familiar to a lot of people, but this is one of those prog bands that I think they really put a lot of work into their lyrics. In fact, so much so that their last two albums, and it's going to be a third trilogy, has prompted the bass player, founder of the band, to actually release a series of fantasy books where they take the story and just do it in a book format. I'm talking about Glass Hammer from Tennessee, and the two albums that have just come out over the last couple of years. Right here, we got Scalagrim and Dreaming City, which are the first two in a trilogy, and now he's got a series of books out. And you know, these guys have a ton of albums, like what, 15, 18 albums. I've lost track how many albums they have. They've been around since the early 90s, and this is all fantasy based prog rock. So if you're a fantasy lover, you read fantasy books like the Tolkien books and the million other series that are out there, and you like reading about wizards and princesses and dragons and battles and warriors and all that sort of thing, magicians and sorcerers and all that, this is right up your alley. And literally, it's like reading a smaller, condensed version of a big 1,000-page fantasy book. Really interesting stuff. And then, you know, musically, you got all these mellotrons and Moog synthesizers, Hammond organs and guitars, and yes, sort of things floating around. Who doesn't love that sort of stuff, right? So Glass Hammer, if you've never checked them out and you like that sort of lyrical concept of fantasy, you might like these guys. Very
nice. Very cool. Very cool. All right. My eighth choice, Manic Street Preachers. Here we go. Love this band to death. They're considered semi considered part of that whole Brit pop scene. But of course, I mean, Oasis are the titans, the band that sucks up all the oxygen in the room. I mean, they're the bright shining light where everybody else is sort of lesser. But I do feel that that the Manics were definitely the most literary of the bands. This is one of my favorite albums of all time. Everything Must Go. Just really sort of cerebral and colorful and really dense turns of phrase and so dense sometimes that it just becomes imagistic and abstract. What they're saying. I mean, one thing I remember saying to Nicky Wire one time, because I really find this about the Manics, and it's really funny, and you can't unsee this once you hear it, but they're a band that when you listen to, when it comes to the phrasing of what they do, it's almost like they've put any care about phrasing aside and just seem to cram in all the words. It's a really funny thing when you listen to a lot of Manics, like when you hear about Bruce Dickinson saying, sometimes those lyrics go by so fast I bite my tongue and my mouth is bleeding, right? When he's singing things live, right? You definitely get that feeling with the Manics sometimes, that they're just trying to pack in so many syllables in the space of a line in a verse or in a chorus that it sometimes sounds funny, and to the point where they have to put the accent on the wrong part of a word sometimes. But talk about a band that's an amazing read. I mean, they've got, I don't know, 15 or 20 studio albums. They're very prolific, and really amazing, cool, poppy, complicated music as well. They can be heavy, they can be a little proggy. Great vocals out of James Dean Bradfield. They were huge Rush fans themselves, but it is more in a just kind of like an intellectual pop vein. And among all those bands, Blur is obviously the other big one, but Oasis is, like I say, the biggest. And I just talked about Suede in my History in 5 Songs podcast, as because a lot of these bands are really hyped, and this band is hyped. And in the UK, they hype a lot of bands that don't translate over to here, or we don't see the hype. This is one that didn't translate commercially over here, but everybody believes the hype. I mean, this is a band that is just super highly respected, and a great read. There you go.
Cool. Yeah, never listened to them. Sounds like something I might want to.
No worries. One day, yeah.
One day, yeah. When I find those couple of minutes.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna stay on prog for another one here. Marillion. So very notable for having not only two vocalists over the course of their career, two very distinct lyricists. You had the Fish era. The Fesh era. I have to remember to say that in the true Scottish way, F-E-S-H. Or F-E-S-C-H, right? Fesh, who was definitely wrote lyrics that could be sort of angst-ridden and angry, sometimes autobiographical. And then you have Steve Hogarth in the post-Fish era, who much more emotional lyrics, a lot of political and social themes, things that are newsworthy going on out there in the world that really kind of make you think about, where we are as humanity and whatnot. But I personally really enjoy the Fish lyrics. And I think they're at times they're kind of like, you're like, well, what does this all mean? They did the two concept albums, Misplaced Childhood and Clutching at Straws. Misplaced Childhood is very grandiose in its scope. Clutching is kind of, I think, Fish kind of talking about how maybe this whole rock stardom maybe is not for him. You got the first couple albums that are like, literally all sorts of cool stuff. I'm losing on the swings. I'm losing on the roundabouts. I'm losing on the swings. I'm losing on the roundabouts. Too much, too soon, too far to go. Too late to say the game is over. Really, really cool stuff. Kind of like you're like, that's pretty heavy, And then I think Marillion were not a heavy band, but I find like a lot of the Fish era music and songs, because of the lyrical content, that the songs sound heavier than they are. And I think it has to do with his delivery and what he's actually saying. So definitely a cool band to kind of sit down and go over, especially the early albums for me, and pour over the lyrics while you're listening. So Marillion.
Yeah, that's a great choice. And it reminds me of this idea that there are certain bands that you love their lyrics so much that you would actually buy a book of their collected lyrics. And a lot of bands have done that. I think way more bands should do that as an income stream and do the collected lyric books. And Marillion is one like that, but it would be amazing to have all the Marillion lyrics of both eras.
Yeah.
Combined with all the Fish lyrics from his solo career, all in one book. And I would sit there and read through that whole thing.
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, Fish is so confessional and hard on the sleeve and just fearless about his emotions, kind of thing, right? So,
yeah.
And speaking of that, that kind of describes my next choice. Warren Zevon, love him to death, right? And he's actually passed on, sadly. He had cancer. This is one of those guys that's in that confessional avocado mafia, country rock, I suppose, a little bit, but just really good music, like more of a Jackson Browne sort of guy, and very literary, but also very, hard on the sleeve. And it's all, everything's very kind of like dramatic, and there's lots and lots of stuff about his drinking problem over the years. Right, there's a lot of definite boozy and alcoholism type lyrics to what he does, and relationship stuff, and it's all just very crushing and very, very emotional. And in this vein, I almost thought to include Graham Parker, who, I love Warren Zevon's early music a lot, but it gets a little 80s and heavy-ish later on. I think I'm more into Graham Parker's music but maybe a little more into Warren Zevon's lyrics. But Graham Parker falls in this space as well, as does Elvis Costello. He falls in this space as well. He's just a brilliant lyricist and very prolific over the years. Great turns of phrase. So that's all in that camp of the singer songwriters, I suppose, right? Which we haven't really had any of those yet.
No.
In this list, so
No.
they're called that for a reason, right? And singer songwriters are often lauded for their lyrics.
I will say Warren Zevon is, if he's not number one, he's probably top 2 or 3. One of those artists where I get all the time, Pete, I can't believe you don't listen to that band or that guy. Warren Zevon is one of them. I hear it all the time. Honestly, I don't think I've ever heard another song other than Werewolves of London.
Yeah.
And
if you ever wanted to access one album and see kind of the range and have the music interesting enough so it doesn't feel like Avocado Mafia, East Coast Eagles kind of things, try Bad Luck Streak and Dancing School.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will. I definitely want to investigate them. I've heard it from enough people that it's like, what am I missing, right?
Yeah.
So Martin mentioned before, having a volume with all of a band's lyrics all in one. Well, my next choice, they actually just did that very, very recently. We showed it off here on the channel. And this band, their central lyricist and only lyricist is Mr. Ian Anderson. The band is Jethro Tull. And I find the lyrics of Jethro Tull absolutely fascinating. And I think it would be really cool to just read a whole book with every single song they ever did back to back, because again, Ian is very clever with his lyric writing. And not only does he kind of touch on things that are going on in social aspects of life and politics, but also, war and nursery rhymes and medieval stuff there, and a lot of very English and British themes and what have you. I pulled out Minstrel in the Gallery here, which again, he tackles a lot of like old British lore and things like that. Some of his stuff is kind of fantasy based. Some is very tongue in cheek. And I find that quite endearing. And I think, when you're listening to a Jethro Tull album or a song, I'm turned on to them big time by the music, because the music is very complex and incorporates all these different elements and styles of music. But then you're listening to those witty lyrics and the way he delivers them. And he has a very unique vocal style that I have always liked. And again, I'm not a lyric guy, but I have always, whenever a new Jethro Tull album comes out, I'm always like, all right. And here I am, I'm following along. I'm like, oh, that's kind of interesting. I would have never phrased something like that, but that's Ian Anderson. That's what makes him so great. So just Mother Goose, Aqualung, Minstrel in the Gallery, Life's a Long Song, all these kind of cool, really, even when he sings about and writes about like holiday themes and stuff, it's very endearing to me anyway. Yeah. So
Great choice. And that brings up another point. When these artists are great in interviews and they don't mind talking about their lyrics and what they mean and give you that second layer down and that third layer down, it totally enhances your appreciation for them. And Ian's like that. He's such a great interview that when you hear the stories behind what's there. Yeah, awesome choice. Okay, my next choice is Frank Zappa. To go in a totally different direction, right? So this is a guy who creates a world. I mean, most of it's social commentary on morality in various ways, and it's almost like he dares you through his political incorrectness and immorality, examples of it, to talk about morality. So this is definitely an artist where on the surface people get really mad at him for certain things he says, but the fact of the matter is the moral message underneath is what you're supposed to be listening to, and it runs the gamut, sexuality and politics and social mores and drugs, right? He's very anti-drug, and really crazy, disturbing things like Thing Fish, which, once you put this thing on, you got to play it all the way through, kind of thing. A lot of conceptual stuff, concept albums, a lot of stuff. I look at Joe's Garage and, very critical of the music industry. He's very cynical about that. All the corruption that goes on. So yeah, that's it. And it's comedic, and there's lots of it. It's a long catalog. So it's just always very entertaining. He's got all these different vocalists delivering all these lines, high guys, low guys, Frank himself, very, very acerbic, sarcastic, and goes along with the, the complicated, interesting, action-packed music as well. So yeah, kind of a funny one. You definitely play old Frank. Well, it's all old Frank Zappa because he left us in, I think it was 91 or 94 or something, right? But you listen to that stuff, and every once in a while he's like, very regularly he says things like, wow, he could never get away with that these days. Right? Yeah. And you can understand why people, one of the biggest things I suppose he got a lot of stick for is the whole misogynist thing, right? Like this whole thing about, we like our groupies, but we put them down all the time, kind of thing. Like there's that goes on, right? So that's one of the big ones, actually, but there's a lot of stuff like that. And just and stupidity of people. I mean, he can sound very snobby at times, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, he rubs people the wrong way a lot, but below it is a very moral message, and we know from the example of his life with the super hard work and the genius and the writing out of the music and stuff, he kind of backed up this idea of a work ethic and being a responsible guy as well. But also he was just a crazy genius, right? I mean, he's one of the few guys we gotta apply that musical genius tag to, if there's ever such a thing, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And a musical genius that, a lot of people just don't get. And I think that's kind of his legacy. But yeah, it's funny how people a lot over the years have really centered on his 80s output, where the lyrics got, pretty crazy and raunchy and controversial. But you go back to those early Mothers albums, and even like the couple the things that he did with Flo and Eddie, the Turtles, there's some wacky lyrics on those as well. Yeah. So that kind of carried him throughout his whole career.
Yeah.
So, all right, my next choice, I don't have a prop, but this is kind of my fun one out of the whole bunch. So I wanted to throw one artist in this list where the only reason I go and read the lyrics is because half the time I don't understand what the fuck he's saying. So Elton John and Bernie Maupin. I can't tell you how many Elton John songs I have loved over the years where for decades I was singing the wrong lyrics.
Right.
Because you're like listening to him and his inflection. Sometimes I'm kind of like, is that what he's saying? Doesn't really make much sense, but I'm going to actually sing it myself the way I think he's saying it. Case in point, hold me closer, tiny dancer. Count the headlights on the highway. Lady Donna, she's so pretty. Had to feel it, today's the day. That's what I thought he was singing for 50 years. No, it's hold me closer, tiny dancer, count the headlights on the highway, lay me down in sheets of linen, you had a busy day today. When I first read those lyrics, what they actually are, I was kind of like, really? And then you listen to it and you're like, oh yeah, how the hell was I thinking it was what I thought it was? And there are like tons of Elton John songs, like Rocket Man and a whole bunch of other ones I've been singing lyrics incorrectly. So in recent years, I've been actually going and trying to follow along with some of these lyrics so I can straighten myself out. But actually, when you read it, these are actually really, really well-crafted songs. I mean, Bernie Taupin was a great lyricist. And this may be a little different, obviously, than some of the other bands that we're talking about here, as far as these grand concepts. But I think in their simplicity, they're really, really well done. And yeah, there you go.
Yeah, wow. See, that's a band like Warren Zevon for you that I don't think I've ever heard an Elton John song before. Just kidding, but no, I'm just not a fan. I just have never really looked into it, and so many people are fans, right? I mean, I'm constantly reminded of the genius of those Elton John albums, and I must get back and listen to those so one day. So
that'll be something, Martin. One day when you actually go and do that, you won't be able to stop listening, because then you'll finally see like just how much greatness is in that early. It's crazy.
So many catalogs out there. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so for something completely different, Lemmy from Motörhead definitely deserves some recognition. I've had to write, I did a Motörhead book, and then I've had to write some stuff recently on Motörhead for a big a couple of articles. And I'm just amazed at how good he was immediately, but then got better and better over the years. And the turns of phrase he comes up with, and again, the morality and the war lyrics. I mean, his war lyrics are on another level beyond Maiden's war lyrics. And it's so compact, and it's not incredibly flashy, but it's so compact and well considered that he gets so much into a few words that aren't flashy words, and all sorts of different topics, and very tongue-in-cheek, and there's a lot of humor. Lemmy is just a guy. I remember there's been these books like The Wisdom of Ozzy Osbourne, or The Wisdom of Keith Richards, or whatever, where you kind of make fun of the lyrics or whatever, or what they're saying. Lemmy's one of those where you could write a whole book just about his lyrics and what they mean, and just appreciating his lyrics as poetry, because, you know, hidden behind that buzzsaw bass and the big guitars of Phil, and the double bass drums of Mickey, and the complexity of every time they go into the end of a verse and do a fill, like, it's always complicated later in life, for sure, right? I mean, Motörhead is a big wall of noise, but a very listenable wall of noise in later years. But, you know, all of those albums that came so quick that nobody really paused and had time to consider. Lemmy has some amazing lyrics on there. And obviously we've seen, you know, one of Lemmy's big claims to fame is he was a songwriter as well, mainly for Ozzy, right? He wrote some songs there, but yeah, you just open the lyric sleeves to any of these and read along, and you just marvel, and you go, wow, this is a whole different Lemmy than I ever knew existed, kind of thing.
And what's surprising to me anyway, he always came across a guy that you look at him and you listen to him and watch him, and you're like, this doesn't strike me as a guy who sits down at a desk and writes lyrics and stuff, but actually he was very much into that, right?
Yeah, for sure.
All right, my next band is Symphony X from New Jersey. I actually just saw them the other day live for the, I don't know, God, I've seen them probably like 6, 7, 8 times. Michael Romeo, who is the main songwriter of the band, he is a big fan of like classical music, progressive rock, heavy metal, film score music, and literature. And much of the Symphony X catalog, the lyrical concepts are all based. I mean, this is Homer's The Odyssey, right? This is one of their, you know, classic albums. A lot of the lyrical themes are based on, you know, different books and you know, classical literature, and he marries that with the this idea of putting together music that incorporates some of the other things I mentioned before. And they're like all mini stories, and I find it really awesome to read. And then, you know, you've got this amazing singer, Russell Allen, who delivers all of these stories. And like, you know, even the other night when they played as their encore, they played the title track to this album, which is, you know, 20-minute long song. And I'm sitting there and I'm as much swept up in the music that they're delivering as I am with Russell up there singing these awesome lyrics that are just very inspiring. So if you're someone who's really interested in classic literature, and you like metal, you like prog, you like classical music and film score music, you can't go wrong with any of the Symphony X stuff. And it's across all their albums. You have these really thoughtful lyrical concepts. And as challenging and heavy as the music is sometimes, that's what's really interesting, when you have one guy who is just putting as much effort into the music as he is to the lyrics. And that's pretty amazing. I think that one guy has been able to do that for this band for all these years.
Yeah, excellent choice. I mean, just absolute super top shelf quality from those guys. You know, start
every album. Yeah.
Cool. All right, my next choice is the Stranglers. Great band, very prolific. Another band that you know, I always talk about these guys as creating a world. I mean, the world they create is a little more on the musical end. It's a world like the Doors or like the Who, where you've got this very distinct sound that comes from all these pieces coming together and creating something no one else sort of would. And here it's like very buzzy, distorted bass sounds, kind of geometric, herky-jerky rhythms. Dave Greenfield on keys, doing a lot of interesting things. But lyrically speaking, it's also an interesting world. There's that Raven album that we featured on when we did our creepiest albums, or evil or most spookiest albums. This is a very spooky album. There they are on the old Longship. So, you know, there's a lot of lyrics that are conspiracy theory and UFO and occult and veiled references to drugs and drinking and divorces and stuff. I mean, later on, you know, they did this Giants album where there they are hung from the swings, you know, just an incredible image. And then inside we've got even kind of more of that going on here. Just a really cool dark band, right? But you know, like good writers are supposed to do, you know, when you're writing books or short stories, the idea of, you know, there's got to be a little bit of hope in there and happiness. So there's light and shade in what they do, and you may not feel it from these amazing images, but you know, and there's the Gospel According to the Men in Black album. This one I've shown before with the two men in black at the Last Supper there. See, hanging out, right? Where's there just one? Anyways, you know, very cool. And you know, the stuff like that. There's the Lord's Prayer adapted for kind of a UFO sort of thing. So yeah, just really prolific, interesting, different lyrics through the years. You got Hugh Cornwell early on, and then they had the big break with him, and then JJ Burnell, and then, you know, Baz Warren is the front man guitarist, you know, big burly guy, bald hair, and they're all involved in all the lyrics, but just really mature, excellent, not super flashy. But a great read and different stories all the time on different things. You know, on the latest album has is it called If or When You See Dave? You know, it was the idea of Dave Greenfield, their keyboardist just died, and it's just this thing about, oh, we were supposed to pop down for a beer and he's not there anymore, and it's like, well, interesting. Like, just really good ways of looking at death. And there's neat stuff in there about he's got a short song called The Lines on My Face, which are about, you know, this one's from my divorce, and this one's from drinking too much, and this one's from smoking too much. It really interesting stuff, right? And good mature lyrics. So yeah, they've always been a good artistic band, and you know, 15 or 20 albums, again, another one of those big long catalogs. So Stranglers.
Boy, that album cover with them hanging on the swing set.
Yeah.
That took balls to release that, huh?
Yeah.
Woo.
Yeah.
Man, oh man. All right, how about some Kansas, people? Probably along with another band I'm going to talk about in a minute, probably the first band I ever really wanted to sit down and read their lyrics. And it was as a result of listening to Left Overture and sitting down and reading the lyrics to Magnum Opus, which very, you know, fantasy based. But I always found like the lyrics of Kansas very uplifting. You know, there's like a undercurrent of spirituality which comes in their lyrics, mainly coming from Kerry Livgren, their guitarist and keyboard player, one of their main songwriters. And I think we haven't really touched on that in any of our picks yet today, that whole spirituality thing, but it's not overbearing. It's there. It comes out a little bit more in the 80s in their music, but it's still there early part, but of their music. But yeah, I really liked their mix of kind of like America's Heartland themes with fantasy, a little bit of sci-fi, and then occasionally just kind of like boogie, like, you know, like general rock and roll themes, because they would throw that out. Or usually got one cut of like that on every album. But man, I mean, you know, especially with Left Overture and Point of No Return, they really matured as lyricists, and just, but there's an uplifting, like I said, all their music is very uplifting. And even you had the two vocalists who were delivering these kind of little mini stories, I think worked really well. So yeah, Kansas, a lot of good variety, a lot of they never stayed on one theme for too long. I think that's what made them so great. And they just kind of kept it fresh, and like I said, deliver these little mini stories on each song on every album that gave you a different kind of a message. But
yeah, interesting choice, because you definitely get that spiritual brightness thing from them. You get this much of that from them, and then with a band like Yes, you get a little more, and it's a little more Eastern and hippie trippy, right? But you get a lot of that brightness. And you know, thinking in my head, you don't get that from Genesis or Vandergraaf. You don't get that from King Crimson. Ian Anderson is not particularly that way either. So it's really yes and Kansas in a way, right?
Yeah, I mean, Ian only really did that on the Aqualung album. Ian Anderson, I should say. So yeah, but Yes have been doing that for ages. But the problem with the Yes lyrics is like sometimes I read along to the Yes lyrics and I'm completely lost. And it just to me, it's not as much fun following along with Yes lyrics as it is following along with Kansas songs and reading the lyrics. That's just me.
Yeah. All right, my next choice. I'm up to the three that I always cite when people ask me this question. So we're back to the what's the first thing that comes into your mind sort of idea when you get asked these questions. And I always bring up Clutch, Neil Fallon. I love Clutch's lyrics. You can tell even just in the titles. You know, they got an album called Strange Cousins from the West, Pitchfork and Lost Needles. You know, the Elephant Riders. He just always makes a good job of making things sound interesting. There's always that sort of redneck, swampy Civil War feel to it, but there's always you know, there's women out back with a shotgun out in the woods and things like that, and there's drinking and there's rocking, but even the rocking is done everything's done in a cool way. It's like you listen to them and you're like, wow, I wish I would have said that sort of thing, right? It's just all very cool. And there's so many memorable lines. He has so many lines that you could play those songs over and over and over again. And because of the order that he puts the words in, it gets to it and you think you're going to sing along and you screw it up every time. And there's a lot of these big anthemic lines of his that are like that, because he'll stretch out a sentence kind of the same way Phil Lynott will stretch out a sentence and sort of you know, add bits onto it and go over what's going on. But they're just such a quality band in every way. The performances are amazing, the recordings are amazing, the packaging is always nice. Where's my blast tyrant? I don't have my blast tyrant here, but yeah, you know, Strange Cousins from the North is a die cut thing and all this. And you look at these song titles like 50,000 Unstoppable Watts, Abraham Lincoln, Minotaur, The Amazing Kreskin, Witch Doctor, Let a Poor Man Be. You know, it's got that whole Creedence Clearwater, the band thing going on as well at the same time. So lots of layers to this band. And just, it's always a treat to just listen along and get cracked up by what Neil's going to say next.
How many albums do they have?
Clutch, I would say it's in the dozen range. They don't put them out as fast anymore as they used to, kind of thing. Well, I guess they spread them out all along. I mean, and because they're such a great live band, they're always they're always playing live, and they're always mixing, you know, they have live material as well that they do, and weird little things and side projects as well, great side projects. But it's just a joy to listen to that guy as a drummer, joy to listen to the productions they come up with. And yeah, Neil's just a constant laugh riot.
It's like a band I've got like maybe 3 of their albums, and I like them. I just, for whatever reason, I just don't listen to them all that much. And it's like, and that's another one of those bands that people tell me all the time. It's like, Pete, I can't believe you don't talk more about Clutch. And it's like, yeah, it's a band I need to investigate more, because I know you love them. You talk about them a lot, and I have other friends of mine that really dig them quite a bit. I've seen them live; they're fun. It's just one of those bands I just haven't explored any further than the couple that I have.
Yeah.
All right, here's one that may be kind of a strange one to some folks, but I've always really enjoyed their lyrics, whether Geezer Butler wrote the lyrics or whether Ronnie James Dio wrote the lyrics or whether Tony Iommi wrote the lyrics or whoever's writing them in the band. I've always kind of had a fascination with Black Sabbath's lyrics. So, and it really started with their first album for me. I mean, this is as big and heavy and evil as some of the early albums sound. You know, Geezer was writing about a lot of weird stuff, a lot of like post-war things and the horrors of war. And there's some political stuff in here, and you know, there is some lurid kind of horror themes as well. There's a lot of, you know, like religious type things going on. I always found like the early albums are really fascinating in their lyrics. This is not classic lyric writing, but it really, really works, and I think it meshes well with the style of music that they were playing. And then, you know, Ronnie joins the band, and of course everything changes. So here you got all the kind of like the demons and wizards and the wishing wells and all that sort of thing, and all of a sudden things get a little bit more interesting. Then Ronnie leaves, then Ian comes in, Ian Gillan, and then all of a sudden you got, because I was you know, I love Deep Purple to death. Uh, I've always had like kind of a love-hate relationship with Ian Gillan's lyrics. I know there he tells a lot of stories and he's very whimsical, but to me, it's more fun. But I don't feel the need to ever sit and read lyrics on Deep Purple albums. And that's kind of like Born Again is kind of like that with me. And then, you know, the Tony Martin era, and it goes back to kind of like the Ronnie type of thing. So I don't know. I've always enjoyed, maybe just because I love the band so much, I've always enjoyed the lyrics to Black Sabbath albums, and I still do to this day. But I really, really appreciate Geezer's stuff early on, because I think it's really fascinating for a guy who always says that he's like, I'm not much of a lyric writer. Pretty fascinating stuff, I think, early on.
Yeah, and the neat thing about him is in a way, he in a certain respect, he is regular rock and roll lyrics in that the word, there aren't a lot of the words. They're not incredibly flashy. They repeat a fair bit, just like you're supposed to repeat, because you have choruses and things to take care of. But he just tears off some amazing gems of lines, you know, just a few words all put together. And then when you hear the story about what the song is about, you realize he's trying to talk about a complex topic in kind of a really simple way, and just puts out some amazing gems in there.
Yeah, and really, and his lyric style is really very reminiscent of what you got throughout the whole psychedelic era in the late 60s. Really not much different at all. And he tackled a lot of the same themes, just, you know, occasionally with throwing this little dart of evilness here and there, right? To throw people off and think all their music is all about the devil and Satan and all that kind of stuff, which it really wasn't. So.
Yeah, funny, yeah. Okay, so my next choice is the second of three that always come to mind. It's Pi Dubois writing for Max Webster, and not only Max Webster, but also Kim Mitchell. All those big hit albums he had in Canada. You know, the EP is one of the greatest 5-song pieces of music ever put together. It's the greatest EP of all time, as far as I'm concerned. And he's writing those lyrics. And then the Akimbo Logo album was a huge hit here in Canada. And the second one, Shaken Like a Human Being, was a huge hit here in Canada. So was Rockland. He's writing all those lyrics as well, but he's writing all the lyrics for Max Webster. And, you know, I love the idea that he's an external lyricist. He's not a musician in the band, yet he's in there writing most of the lyrics. Terry Watkinson would do some as well. And there'd be, you know, other little odd situations, but it's mostly Pi. And, they're very colorful. They're kind of childish. And again, when you get back to that thing about how great writers or great artists, visual artists, it's not supposed to all be about darkness all the time. There's kind of a brightness and a hope and even a giddiness to what he does. And yeah, it's kind of like a childlike thing. You know, when I bring it up with him, he's a buddy of mine, and you know, he kind of takes umbrage at the childlike thing. He doesn't like that sort of description of it. And there's a little bit of Captain Beefheart to it, a little bit of playfulness. And that's another guy who I could have put on this list. His lyrics are pretty amazing as well. Definitely an honorable mention for me. But what Pi did, you know, number one, he really needed to be reined in. So he needed a heavy editor, whether that was Kim Mitchell or, you know, the few times that Neil Peart had to be his editor to put stuff together. So what he turns in is even more wacky and out there, but it gets turned into rock and roll songs. And even still, they're very weird foreign rock and roll songs, but just delightful turns of phrases again, and very poetic, but also bright. It just seems really colorful and almost tropical colored, what he did across those Max Webster albums. There you go. Pi Dubois.
Cool. Yeah, good choice. All right, my number 2 is, again, probably no surprise to many who know my love for horror movies and all the ghoulish stuff out there. Merciful Fate and King Diamond.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I love the lyrics to this stuff. I think King is, you know, I think if I were ever to sit down with him and talk to him, we probably like all the same old classic horror movies. And he's just been, and all his concept albums on the King Diamond side, you know, the lyrics to Abigail, Fatal Portrait, Them, The Eye, all that stuff, very, very cool. Just I could literally just read those lyrics. I don't even need to hear the music, because I love that sort of thing. And I mean, this album, the early Merciful Fate stuff, it's, you know, very kind of satanic and evil, but still really, really cool. I dig that sort of stuff. And if you can horror themes is a very specialized kind of thing. It's a very niche, and you either love that sort of thing or you don't. And for me, the music of both King Diamond Solo and Merciful Fate is the perfect backdrop to these horrific stories that he's telling. And I really, really love it a lot. And most people, again, they center on King Diamond or the band Merciful Fate and like the vocals and that great music, which it is. But man, there's some serious stuff going on behind the scenes on these lyrics. These are all little mini movies on each of these albums, and I really dig that a lot. And then, of course, with the King Diamond solo band, you get all these concept albums and whatnot, which are even bigger scope movies. So yeah, I love that. So King Diamond, Merciful Fate.
Great choice. And they are very conceptual. He's very detailed and kind of complex with but the thing that people don't realize is, again, like a Geezer Butler, a lot of these guys, he's got some really poetic lines. And when they are poetic lines, they're really evil poetic lines, right? Like they're like, wow, this is like almost like reading Aleister Crowley in certain respects. Yeah. Good choice. All right. My last one is the first one that always comes to mind and gets mentioned, Blue Öyster Cult. This is a band that you go back to the early days and you send in for the tractor feed lyrics from the band for 50 cents to Columbia. And many people did, because they are such amazing lyrics. And you're wondering, what the heck are they talking about? And they've got Patti Smith and Richard Meltzer and Jim Carroll, all these big writers, John Shirley, Michael Moorcock involved in the lyrics, but also Sandy Pearlman. As we mentioned with Voivod, they've got the Imaginos thing going throughout. I did this Flaming Telepaths book, which is, you would call this fan fiction as a jumping off point. And I'm not the only guys who's done sort of fan fiction based on Blue Öyster Cult. That's how inspiring they are. It's almost like Lovecraft and that whole Cthulhu mythos and all those writers going on doing extra Lovecraft stuff. Blue Öyster Cult is kind of like that. And, I did these 39 illustrations in the book that go along with it. So, they've inspired me to draw and write and take that whole crazy Imaginos story further. Albert Bouchard has done Imaginos 1 and 2 as albums again. So he's taken that story further, but it's bikers and conspiracy theories and UFOs and really neat stuff about rocking and rolling and kind of evil satanic stuff, and the Kennedy assassination and all sorts of stuff, all wrapped up in one. And always very, very Joan Crawford has risen from the grave, and they tied themselves to the axles of Big Mac trucks, and veteran of the psychic wars, a lot of paranormal stuff. Somebody sent me a list once. I think there's something like a dozen vampire songs involved in all this as well. Yeah.
Don't forget big giant lizards crushing Tokyo, right?
Yeah, big giant lizards too. So yeah, what a Don't Fear the Reaper. Just great lyric after great lyric. Patti Smith's involved. So there's this army of lyricists that help them out. They're mostly music writers, but they've got this cool cabal of downtown New York, literary denizens, that are involved in helping them, make these amazing records, song after song, all of it super interesting. So yeah, first choice, Blue Öyster Cult.
Very cool. So, Martin and I often, when we're doing these type of shows, we try not to overlap. So we'll go and let each other know what our picks are beforehand, so we don't duplicate. But for this particular episode, we said, let's just pick what we're going to pick. And if we pick some of the same bands, that's cool. So up until now, we haven't picked any of the same bands, and we're with my final choice, we're not going to. But I am kicking myself for not picking BOC, because I didn't even think about them, and I'm like, that would have been the one time, because I that's a total miss on my part. But okay. Yeah, we did not overlap at all. And my last one is Rush, Neil Peart, again along with Kansas. One of those bands early on in the late 70s where I actually really wanted to sit down and read the lyrics. I mean, a perfect example, I pulled this album for a reason. I mean, if you're a sci-fi fan and you don't get off on when our weary world was young, the struggles of the ancients first began, the gods of love and reason sought alone to rule the fate of man. They battled through the ages, but still neither force would yield. Their people were divided. Every soul is a battlefield. On and on and on it goes. I mean, this is just some intense stuff. And whether you favor the more sci-fi lyrics of Neil's early on, or some of the more kind of modern approaches he took and sort of semi-autobiographical things that he did later on. The guy was a genius with writing lyrics. And again, the time, it's been well documented, the time that he spent actually putting together these songs from a lyrical perspective is pretty amazing. And at the time, I don't know a lot of guys who were doing that. So yeah, Rush for me was, when we said we were going to do this, that was like the first on my list, because again, I'm not much of a lyric guy. There's very few bands that I actually will sit down and open up this lyric book and actually read along to it. Rush has always been one of those for me. So.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I grappled with, do I talk about Rush? And there's a few bands here I just didn't want to talk about because I've talked about them so many times, but obviously an amazing choice. Yeah, Neil's lyrics are so good, and so compact, and yet he gets so much meaning into like 5 words in a row, and then on to the next line and another 5 words, and like, wow. Yeah. And then the story about it, and again, another guy who's been, you wouldn't think this, but he's been a pretty good explainer about what's going on in those lyrics, and that just makes them all the better as well. So yeah, cool, nice.
Yeah, and as far as honorables, I mean, for me, I had Genesis in my honorable mention, specifically the early stuff, because I find like the Peter Gabriel era is pretty interesting to read along to, talking about hogweeds and lambs on Broadway and all that kind of crazy stuff, yeah. Right? And some of the Zeppelin lyrics are kind of cool, but I didn't come up with many more. I don't know if you have a couple more.
Yeah, it's interesting. So yeah, along the theme of the Rush thing, I didn't really want to talk about Thin Lizzy. They would be an honorable mention. The Who and Pete Townsend would be an honorable mention. The Clash. I didn't want to talk about these bands because we have talked about them recently and for other reasons, but they're all in there. But I found it also kind of interesting. Among the big thrash bands, Overkill would be way up there for me. Yeah. But I have a long list of oddly enough. The likes of a couple of my favorite bands that you think are artsy bands, like The Damned and Kate Bush. Neither of those I would particularly have to put on this list at the super very end of the top. But I thought of bands like Zeppelin, ZZ Top, AC/DC, Kiss, Aerosmith, UFO are not going to ever get on a list like this. So there are a lot of bands. It was pretty easy, that bands that I absolutely love, that it was easy to not put them on this list. So there you go. That's kind of what I had. Ronnie James Dio kind of fits in a well with this idea of creating this interesting worldview or philosophy with these various tenets that you see come up constantly through life. That's kind of cool to see as well, where you get the full philosophy of the guy by the end of the road, kind of thing. But yeah, I would say Thin Lizzy, The Who, Pete Townsend, Clash, Rush would be my big ones.
Cool. Yeah. So there you have it, everybody. Our favorite lyric bands. List yours in the comments below, and we'll see what everybody comes up with, if we have lots of crossover with what Martin and I talked about today, or whether there's some like no-brainers that we completely forgot about. It's possible. It's possible. So Martin, what's going on your end? Contrarians, podcasts, books?
Yeah, so I basically say, go check out the Contrarians YouTube show, our show that we do with Marco, and I've got the podcast History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff, and then I've got any books that you might need are at martinpopoff.com.
Cool. All right. So coming up here on the channel, we've got the UK Connection tomorrow on Saturday with Simon Brain, Stephen Reed, and myself. We're going to be doing our favorite and least favorite Magnum albums. That's happening tomorrow. Sunday, we've got album homework assignment. George Lemie going head-to-head with Jamie Laszlo. That's coming up on Sunday, and then we kick off the work week once again with the Hudson Valley Squares on Monday. So thanks for watching, everybody. Visit us on the web at www.seaoftranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube all together all the damn time. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Click on that notification bell. We've also got down below the link to our merch page and our Ko-Fi page. So thanks for everything you do, everybody, and for all the views. For Martin Popoff, I am Pete Pardo. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody. See you real soon. Bye-bye.